Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. The brain is the most complex part of the human body. This 3-pound organ is responsible for our intelligence, interpreting sensation, initiating body movement, and controlling all of our behaviors. The brain and the rest of the central nervous system are composed of a variety of cells, but the primary functional unit is a cell called a neuron. All sensations, movements, memories, and feelings are a result of signals that pass through neurons of differing shapes, sizes, and functions. The average brain contains between 80 and 90 billion neurons, the cell bodies of which form gray matter. The brain is a masterpiece of God's miraculous creation, yet over time, there are many factors that impact brain development and steps that can be taken to reverse some of the factors contributing to an aging brain. Mthfr Jennings is a doctor, medical doctor, has been in private practice as a Christian psychiatrist and certified master psychopharmacologist since 1997. Board certified in psychiatry by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. He is a specialist in transcranial magnetic stimulation, a drug-free treatment for depression. He spent more than 2 decades researching the interface between biblical principles and modern brain science, and is a highly sought-after lecturer and international speaker, and the author of The God-Shaped Brain, The God-Shaped Heart, and The Aging Brain, Proven Steps to Prevent Dementia and Sharpen Your Mind. You can find more information at agingbrain.com. In addition, he has authored The Remedy, a New Testament paraphrase, including the Psalms, and is working to complete the remainder of the Old Testament. You can find out more about his ministry website at comeandreason.com. Appearing here on the third Thursday of every month at 10 a.m. is our good friend, doctor, and theologian, Mthfr Jennings. Tim, good to see you. Welcome to your hour with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always enjoy it.
It is a pleasure. You know, I've been thinking about conversations regarding the brain's capacity. And as we age, we know that there are certain factors that reduce the brain's capacity, but there's also things that stimulate and expand the brain's capacity to retain knowledge, to expand knowledge, to create skill sets, if you will. And I began to wonder how that really operates. Can the brain expand? Is there growth? Can I become smarter? Or this thing we call IQ, which was tested long ago when I was a kid and tested again in college, was a number, apparently measuring my ability for figuring out what patterns go together. Not sure that I'm a great pattern guy, but I'm a pretty smart guy. So I might not be great at patterns, but I might be smart at other things. Can I develop, can I grow in my capacities? Can an individual grow in their capacities? Is the brain an evolving organ? How does all that work?
It's a great question, and I think that the easiest analogy for people to get their mind around it would be to look at physical athletic abilities, and you just look across the playground or the school ground, and different individuals have different athletic genetic potential. Some people are just naturally more athletic, and some people are less naturally athletic. We know that. We can see that. But regardless of your starting, so what I'm pointing out now is there's a genetic limitation that we have. Some people will never, no matter how hard they apply themselves, be a Tiger Woods or Michael Jordan. They just don't have the genetic potential for it. But regardless of your starting point athletically, if you begin to exercise, if you begin to train, if you begin to practice, wherever your starting point is, there will be growth, there will be improvement. You will get better at whatever you apply yourself toward. Okay, that on a physical level, on the athletic side, is also true for our brains. We have different potentials that we start with. Some people have different music, like Mozart, great musical potential. I don't have that. Some have great art potential. Some have great abstract thinking potential. Some have great problem solving, critical reasoning potential. Okay, but as we apply that, those potentials will develop. And so inside the brain is developing networks or pathways, and it's the complexity of these networks, these connections of neuron to neuron connections that get developed through exercise and practice. So in the brain, after Einstein died, we all know how smart Einstein was, right? They did a biopsy of his brain, and they looked at how many neurons that he had in a cubic centimeter of his brain, and he had less neurons per cubic centimeter than the average person has. But he had significantly more neuron-to-neuron connections than the average person had. And it's these connections that make these networks for information processing that correlate with intelligence and capacity for reasoning and discernment. Or if you were a cabbie in London, they actually have done MRI scans on cabbies in London. And the cab drivers in London, in the part of the brain that we reference three-dimensional space and where we are in our environment, they have actually a larger area there. They have developed a much larger network of information processing to know how to get through all of the complex roads there in London. And so that's, and we've seen this in musicians who practice their instrument in the part of the brain for musical skill. So the answer to your question is yes. We absolutely can expand our capacity. Our IQ can be increased by exercise and practice. As we exercise, neurons will expand, networks will improve. But within the limitation of our genetic limitation, there's still in this body that we inhabit on the earth, there's limits that we can't go beyond. I can promise you, I would never be a Mozart, no matter how many musical lessons I took. I didn't have that potential. But I could have developed some musical skill that I currently don't have had I taken lessons as a child. Also, in addition to this, there are windows where we can achieve more quickly. For instance, the first 7 years or 8 years of life, the brain has the greatest potential for establishing the initial networks that will continue to build upon later in life. When the child is born into the world, the child has millions of neurons more at birth than the brain has for when the child is 8 years of age. The brain is knocking off neurons for the first 8 years, and so it's the neurons which are used and retained that the brain retains and establishes networks. If we don't use them, when we lose them, this is why it's critical that kids not do a lot of theatrical television watching growing up, and they actually, if you want them to speak more than one language, you start teaching them languages early on, and kids can grasp those languages much quicker than we can as an adult. Now, we can still learn languages as an adult. The brain will make those networks, but it is not quite as robust and pliable the older we get. And then once we end up in late life, the brain still can learn, but it's still more difficult the later we get because we lose the resiliency of just physical health that the brain needs to make those processes happen.
You know, you bring up a very interesting point and one that's very personal to me. I grew up in a home, an Eastern European home, where many languages were spoken. I was surrounded by Russian speakers, Ukrainian speakers, German speakers, Yiddish speakers, Hungarian speakers, and this cacophony of sound around me, and the ability to, when I was with my Hungarian grandparents, to be able to not speak but understand what they were saying. When I was in elementary school, I struggled with reading because the syntax of English is noun-verb. The syntax of other languages is verb-noun. There are words in English like there, and there, which don't exist in other languages. And it was very difficult for me to make sense of it, and especially since I was exposed to Hebrew at a very early age. So I struggled in school, and they said that the only thing I could do was to try phonics, which was a brand new concept. The records were about that thick. They came in a brown, like wax wrapper. It was two-sided, and I had to come home from school and put on the record player and learn to read by phonics. And my father said, listen, you can't go out and play until you can read. And he went out, as he was prone to do, bought a leather-bound set of Mark Twain and said, when you've read all these, you can go play with the other kids. So I was highly motivated to do that, but it was challenging because I couldn't grasp the concept because of the linguistic foundation, but I was also forbidden by my father to learn the other languages or speak the other languages because he was so intent on raising us as Americans. And he did not want us to have the stigma of that Eastern European Jewish persecution. So it was very conflicting for me. My sisters, he didn't pay attention to what they did or learned, but for me, he was really focused in on, you're just not going to be this way, if you will. And it was challenging, but I overcame the challenge, but became an avid reader.
And your brain rewired.
And my brain rewired. So, in retrospect, I would have loved to have had the 7 languages that my grandfather spoke.
Yeah.
And had the aptitude at that age to be able to learn them, to grasp them, to understand them and converse in them. Today, I still struggle with Hebrew. Even though it's a language I'm in every single day, it's a struggle for me because it was the one that was pushed to the side to replace it with English at the sacrifice. And you still had to do the Hebrew work, but it was almost secondary and it was diminished in its importance in my life because he was so driven for me to be that American kid.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
That I can see where children have these great capacities to do all this. Do we lose that? Can we develop that? Are there my mother's 94. She does lots of puzzles and crossword puzzles, and she keeps her brain very active, and she's an avid reader. So she shows no signs of mental aging. Her memory isn't as good as it was, but her response is, if you have a question for me, you just need to let me know if you need the answer now, or can you wait until 3 o'clock in the morning when I remember?
And what you've just described is how the brain does change. Young people can assimilate data, memorization, faster than older people typically. They can memorize very quickly. Older people, having developed the networks for information processing, can, if they are mature, not everybody with age matures, okay, but if they're a mature older person like your mom or you, okay, would be able to process with wisdom the information more efficiently than a young person. A young person might memorize, let's memorize this 53rd chapter of Isaiah, and 2 people have never done it. A young person will typically do it more quickly than an older person who's never memorized it before. But the older person would be able to process deeper meaning out of it much more quickly than the younger person could. The younger person would tend to see things more literally, more concretely. The older person who has developed critical reasoning skills, abstract reasoning skills, have pathways to comprehend wisdom and perspective that a younger person is still struggling to develop.
From a societal perspective, in this information age that we're in, we're constantly bombarded with a lot of things. Now, I'm not a television watcher, and I have a very I don't want to say regimented, but I'm up at 5, reading, preparing, I'm studying, I'm scheduling, I'm following up, I'm doing the things that I do as part of, really all I do has to do with the Bible and with the interviews and authors that I'm interviewing for that day, or a teaching material that I'm working with. So it's all biblically based.
And you have deep networks of biblical processing. You can take facts and you can process them very quickly through that biblical filter, biblical worldview, we might say. And that gives you a wisdom that somebody who might memorize a Bible verse but has never developed a biblical worldview might be able to recite the verse but not really know what it means.
So are there things we can do deliberately to, one, develop practice to expand these neural paths and these neural connections?
Yes. Yes.
And are there ways to filter out and understand that what is coming in is interference? It's blocking those neural connections.
Let's take a biblical principle, Hebrews 5:14. The mature are those who've developed by practice the ability to discern the right from the wrong. So it doesn't say the mature are those who have memorized the most Bible verses. It's developed by practice, the ability to discern. So you have to have, and so the way you get that is you have to exercise, you have to reason, you have to weigh evidences, you have to be a lover of truth and then think through problems, a way through the, as the Bible says, these things are written down as examples for us. We take the lessons that God has given us in history, we apply them to real world circumstances. We, with godly humility, we exercise the power of choice in applying those wisdoms, and then we reevaluate the outcomes to update. This is how we grow and mature, okay? Understand, though, that there are forces that at work that do not want people to become mature. They do not want people to develop discernment skills, wisdom. They don't. They want followers. They want people to believe based on claim, rhetoric, proclamation, authority of office, even from the church side, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. That is actually, God's not God. God says, come let us reason together. Let every person be fully persuaded in their own mind, Romans 14:5. God actually wants to persuade us, because the only way to heal a heart is through our participation, our surrender and agreement. You can't heal a heart by using force to intimidate them. It only causes them to rebel and to cower in fright. And so what we see in the world today, though, is a real process assaulting our children in which ideas are brought forth that are actually contrary to evidence and reality by various thought leaders and so-called authorities, maybe even scientists, and yet they contradict obvious reality and contradict God's word. And if you are a person who were to try to speak up for truth as in the biblical worldview, you will be pressured, coerced in some way, ostracized, labeled a modern-day heretic, a heretic to any wise person. I think it's a simple example. Godless evolution. There is no God. There's no creator. And all of the world knows that. You go to any university, any school, any public funding for grants or research or any peer-reviewed journal, it's all, of course, known that there is no, and anybody who would suggest that there's evidence to support creation, well, they're just dark, they're just ignorant, they're silly, and we should defund them, we should deplatform them, we should silence them, we should not evaluate the evidence, even though, I will tell you, anybody who's truly looked at the evidence knows it is an irrefutable fact that life, the science proves that life could not have originated on its own. It required an intelligent designer. And I'll just say it real fast. Why? Because life, as we understand life, every form of it, requires 3 elements: physical matter, energy, and coded information we found in the DNA and the RNA. Now, all the godless theories focus on matter and energy. But there is no possibility that you can take and create coded information, taking letters of an alphabet, and write a book. You can't get the letters to arrange themselves into actionable information that works without an intelligence doing that. And they all know it, and they all deny it. And this damages the mind to have truth present to you that you reject and hold to a false view. Then your capacity for real discernment is undermined. And then what do? We end up believing authorities are people in positions of power. And this is happening to our kids in school. This is happening on a whole host of other. Here's another one. Your truth is your truth. My truth is my truth. There isn't really any truth. There's no male or female. Gender is just a religious artifact made up by people who want to control you. Understand, every species on the planet, there's male and female, and everybody sees everywhere they go constantly male and female, but now you're being conditioned to deny it. It's that modern day emperor's clothing. Everybody knows there's male and female. Everybody knows that that there actually are objective realities and truths, but everybody is being conditioned to believe that this isn't true. So what does it do to the mind? It dethrones reasoning skills, and it undermines the development of godly maturity, and it causes people to become followers who will follow whoever's in authority or whoever's charismatic or whoever has power, rather than becoming a mature Christian who can discern right from wrong.
In your psychiatric practice, as you look at the various diagnoses and challenges that people face, how much would you say is genetic, predisposed, or a function of a mind bombarded without the ability to rightfully place importance on the influence that's impacting them?
So the vast majority of mental health problems are an interaction between biology and environment. It's not an either-or argument. You really need to have certain vulnerabilities genetically to develop schizophrenia under stress. But people with certain vulnerabilities to schizophrenia, if they're not hit with certain stressors, they won't actually manifest psychosis. It's a combination. PTSD. Not everybody who gets traumatized, whether it's combat, whether it's child abuse, develops PTSD. You have to have genetic vulnerability plus trauma to develop PTSD. Alcohol dependence. Not everybody who drinks alcohol becomes dependent, but not everybody with dependent genetics becomes alcoholic, because maybe they're raised in a family where the religious beliefs are a teetotaler, that we don't drink, so they never actually drink alcohol in their life. Even though they're vulnerable to it, they never develop alcoholism because they've never drank alcohol. Okay, so it's a combination of both genetic vulnerability and environment that results in mental disabilities and mental health problems for the vast majority. Sure, are there conditions that are just 100% genetic driven? Yes, there are. Down syndrome would be a condition that is chromosomally driven, but there are also genetic disorders as well. But there's a small percentage that are solely contributed exclusively by the genes.
Do you find that in this COVID anxiety or COVID depression syndrome, that it's environmental and people are responding from do I have to have a biological predisposition to depression and anxiety, or can I be completely impacted by the circumstances and don't have the coping mechanism to be able to navigate it?
When it comes to major depression, essentially anybody can experience major depression if the circumstances are right for them. People have different vulnerabilities, though. The genes will cause people to be more resilient, so some people will have to take a lot more hits to get depressed than others. But for instance, if we were to sleep deprive people, nutritionally deprive people, also throw thyroid dysfunction and a sleep disorder on somebody and then stress them, you can put that brain into a state of clinical depression. Okay, but it can take. But other people, it might simply be conflict with a coworker and an argument where they're rejected or fired from a job and they collapse into depression. Not just the hurt feelings of a conflict, but the actual clinical depression. So people have different vulnerabilities to depression depending on their genetics. But when it comes to depression, anybody can have a depression depending on the number of hits they take.
So if we look at this concept of serotonin, we look at the brain producing chemicals or processing chemicals that can be circumstantially catalytic, or do I have to have that as a
So yes, there is a gene defect called the MTHFR gene. This gene is the gene that codes for metabolism, an enzyme that metabolizes folic acid from food into a methylated version that gets into our brain and is a required cofactor for your brain to make dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. About 50% of people with depression have a genetic mutation where they can't metabolize folic acid into this methylated form, can't get into their brain, they don't produce it well. That makes them a higher risk for depression because they're not producing enough of these neurotransmitters. You supplement them with methylfolate and their mood improves, and it actually has antidepressant benefit. However, if somebody were just having a bad diet, they don't have the gene defect, they just have a bad diet, so they never get really much folic acid in their diet to be converted, they can also have the same problem. So it could be from genetic vulnerability, or it could be from bad nutrition.
So going back to the God-shaped brain and the God-shaped heart, which were your original works when we first met 5 years ago, the concepts presented in there was that God is the architect of this brain. There is what you and I would call a God center, that this is a masterpiece, and there are things that we can, in harmony with God's plan of diet, exercise, lifestyle, we can partner for the healthy development of this God-shaped brain and ultimately the God-shaped heart, which in the Hebrew they're really one and the same, because that's the thinking center is the heart.
When I use the heart, I'm really speaking of the character. So in our modern English, heart means more your individuality, your character, your motives, where brain is the physical structure. But you're right. In the Hebrew, the heart was the brain. The splanchna, the bowels were we call the heart. Yeah. So you're exactly right. But again, within genetic limitation, you're exactly right. You follow godly principles, both physical for diet, sleep, relational, integrity in marriage. People who cheat and commit adultery or dishonor their mother and father and have conflictual relationships, they do not have good health because they have lots of stress, fire their fear circuitry, inflammatory cascades. It actually has a penalty to pay on the physiology to do that. So you're exactly right. Harmony with God's methods is healing to us within the limits of genetics. But even within that, we're still aging. This mortal is still mortal. This corruption physiologically is still corrupt, and God doesn't promise us new physiology until the mortal puts on immortality and the corruption puts on incorruption. What he promises us here is new hearts and right spirits, transformation of the inner man, where we actually become Christ-like in character, where we no longer are held in slavery by our fear of death, Hebrews 2:15. Instead, these are they who do not love their life so much as to shrink from death, Revelation 12:11. We actually come to love God and others more than self. We stop acting driven by survival instinct, and we're no longer governed by fear. Perfect love casts out fear. And that's healing. We have better physical health, less disabilities, less dementias. There's all that's true, but even all of that, we still, if the Lord doesn't come, pass into that first sleep-death experience, waiting for the resurrection.
It's fascinating to me. We're talking with Dr. Timothy Jennings, as we do on the third Thursday of every month at 10 o'clock. He is not only a practicing psychiatrist and certified master psychopharmacologist, he is also a well-respected, at least well-respected by me, theologian who has taken on an incredible project, which is the Remedy paraphrased translation of the New Testament and Psalms. You're working on the Old Testament so that you can release the entirety of the Bible. It is a very pleasurable, affirming read. I can say that from the personal copy I have of the Psalms. It really is a paraphrase that brings a great deal of comfort without compromising the true meaning of the text. And I salute you for that. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I want to talk about the ways that we can, even at this, I hate to say, but in brain years, this advanced age, that I can continue to develop additional capacities for learning and in the neural pathways that I've already established. And can I actually create new neural pathways? You talk about musician. It's been one of my, I have never acted on it, but I always want to learn to play the piano. And now there's these courses that make it so that you can learn to play the piano. Can I develop those neural pathways to connect that? Because I never have before. I've tried, it didn't work. It didn't connect. I took the piano lessons and the guitar lessons, and they didn't connect. I didn't get it. I couldn't get my hands to do different things. They did the same things, no matter how hard I tried to get them to do something different. But is that possible, probable, improbable, a fool's errand, or something that I can look forward to developing in my 70s, new skill sets? We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, host of Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Revealing Prophecy, seen every week on the Igniting Nation Broadcasting Network. Our daily on-demand programming is available on our Apple and Android apps and on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Android TV. We broadcast live Monday through Friday through our apps, on our website, ignitingnation.com, and on Facebook Live. You can listen daily on our audio platforms on Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, and iHeart. Our lineup of best-selling authors bring you the most in-depth biblical insights into the most pressing issues of our time, including prophecy, Israel, spiritual warfare, and a wide variety of contemporary Christian issues impacting the body of Messiah around the globe. If you missed the live show, you can always catch up on the Igniting Nation YouTube channel. Follow us on social media and join us as we endeavor to heal the nations with the Word of God.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to study right by my side through the Biblical Truth Library. Imagine having access to over 1,000 hours of audio and video teachings available to you through our website on a subscription basis or via our Apple and Android apps on an a la carte basis. Whichever method you choose, we promise to deliver new insights into the living Word of God as seen through the eyes of a Jewish believer. If you hunger and thirst like millions around the world for a deeper walk with God and the revelation of new understanding of the Scriptures, visit ignitingnation.com and click on the Biblical Truth Library or on any device with our free app. Don't let another day go by without receiving your heart's desire for a new depth of understanding into all of God's Word. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. And as we do on the third Thursday of every month at the 10 o'clock hour, we meet with our good friend, doctor and theologian, Timothy Jennings. You can find out more about him at his ministry website, commonreason.com, or about his book, Unproven Steps to Prevent Dementia, at agingbrainbook.com. Tim, welcome back.
Thanks, Eric. Glad to be here.
So the aging process does certain things. We age. But if we look biblically, Moses at age 80 was being called to develop leadership skills, oratory skills, and be a spokesman for God and lead 2 million people in a position he had never been in before, after 40 years of isolation with sheep. How does that play into this aging brain? How does this play into this 80-year-old man who is now been told by God, listen, you have everything it takes to do this?
Doesn't the Bible say that right prior to his death, he was like 120, and it says his eye was not dim nor his vital force abated?
Right.
Yeah. So Moses, I think, is a great example of, even in this mortal body, the New Testament tells us that the Holy Spirit brings life to our bodies. That when we walk closely with God, and this is my personal view, the Bible also tells us that when Moses walked close to God, he would come out of the sanctuary and his face would be radiating some kind of light. It wasn't combustion. His whiskers weren't on fire.
Right.
Okay, but they describe it as a fire, some type of divine heavenly light that Jesus had at the Mount Transfiguration. Same thing there with Elijah standing with him and Moses there. So I think the reality is that as we come close to God in our journey and bring our minds into connection with his minds, and we unite with him, there is some type of a I don't know if you want to call it a quantum connection, but there's some type of a connection that's real in God's universe, how he built reality, where we actually are energized by his presence in our life. Our body becomes a real spirit temple where he dwells, and it brings us peace, it calms the stress, it brings health and vitality to our being. I think it's very real there. It doesn't stop the aging process as we know it, because we're still mortal beings, but our capacities will expand and our ability will improve. And I'm not talking about simply the gifts of the Spirit that we can get, where God gifted people with various skill sets. In Moses' case, he actually had to apply. God gave instructions, and Moses first was a little resistant, but then he chose to, okay, Lord, and he went forward and began practicing and applying those abilities. And so the question is, can we develop new abilities? You gave the example of yourself with music. We absolutely can, within the limits of our biology. And so some of us just don't have real good music skills. There are people that are known to be tone deaf. They just, if they can't carry a tune, they can practice all they want, but the best they probably could get would be very mechanical, more like paint by numbers. If you know what paint by numbers are, and you get a little thing and you peck out a tune, okay, they probably could do something like that. But they'll never be musicians, not true artists, not like, and you know the difference between seeing a Rembrandt and seeing somebody who paint by numbers one of Rembrandt's paintings. You could recognize it as a Rembrandt, but you know it's not his, it's a paint by number. Okay, so when you talk about your practicing, yes, you can definitely still create new neural pathways. In fact, the aging science tells us that if you want to forestall dementia or loss of ability, it's not simply repetitively doing things you already know how to do, like working puzzles. It would be learning something you don't know how to do, like taking a new language and learning a new language, or practicing an instrument. When you do something with new learning, your brain turns on genes that create new pathways that protect you from dementia. So yes, your brain can still do that.
Looking at people like myself and yourself who have a passion for God's Word, and you have a passion for your medical practice, but you invested the time and training into getting that education. Now you're in the applied side of it. You're still continuing education, but you've been devoting a lot of time to the theological pursuit, and that's been something that you and I have actually kind of shifted a little bit of our narrative over the years to more of the theological than the psychiatric,
neurobiological.
The neurobiological. In our cases, as we expand new theological thought, new theological pursuit, as I interview authors who bring new perspectives and new insight into text, or a new paper that they've written, or a completely different approach to it, am I actively expanding, or am I just continuing down the same path?
So you're expanding. There's no question. And this is an evidence of what the Bible describes as the saved compared to the lost in Thessalonians. The lost were lost because they did not love the truth and thus be saved. The saved to have hearts that love truth. And God is infinite. We're finite. And so the lovers of truth never arrive at the truth. They're always moving forward in the truth. There's always new truth in harmony with our infinite God of truth for all eternity future, because we don't become infinite God. And so when you're on that journey that's constantly expanding your perspectives, your wisdom, your neural network, yes, this is very healthy for us to do. One of the dangers to the mind is to be indoctrinated into a creed of some sort that this is the final word of truth, and all other new light must be rejected because it might contradict the creed that we currently hold. That actually enfeebles the mind.
Well, it's encouraging, because obviously my passion is the Hebrew text and its connection to the New Testament, the New Testament's connection to the Old, in having this broad spectrum of guests where I can go down many different paths and challenge what I thought 10 years ago when I was less mature in the Word than I am today. I teach differently. This is my third go-round in teaching the Torah. line by line, verse by verse, and you can see the progression for the first 5 years to the second 5 years, now into the third, fifth year. Things that are emphasized and things that are amplified are completely different.
That, and I want to applaud you. That shows that you are continuing to develop, grow, mature. Your brain is still pliable and changing. You've probably seen teachers in university or other places that they teach the same class, regimented and rigid, and there is no advancement. It's the same. You could see, took the class 20 years ago, and you come back and your notes are exactly nothing moves. That is not healthy teaching or growth. I love to hear what you're saying. So you have my affirmation on that. I love that.
Thank you. Because I'm kind of in a lane by what I do and what I've been doing for the last 25 years. And I want to expand that. And as you and I've talked about, is building my brain, maintaining my brain, my sharpness. I don't want to fade. I don't want to, one of the real attractions in you and I becoming friends and counselor and advisor and talking about the things we talk about is to keep on a path of stimulation of investigating areas that I know nothing about brain science. But it's fascinating to me because we all have one and we don't understand it. And there's some fallacies. One of the things we wanted to talk about was the fallacies of the use of the brain. You know, people say you use 1/10 of your brain, but your position on that is, of course, different. But it requires an understanding of the brain science and then what we can do to expand these, as you once said, a single lane to a 16-lane pathway that expands our ability to learn, to reason, to process. So how do we dispute or discount this statement that the human being, and I think what they're saying is they only actively use a small part of the brain.
We'd go down explain it a different way and say that most people don't develop the 100% of their brain. In other words, people use what they have, but as we already just described, the law of exertion, if you don't exercise something, then it doesn't develop, it doesn't strengthen. In fact, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so it's the exercise of the neural circuits that cause those pathways to develop. If somebody has not done much critical reasoning, hasn't studied, hasn't learned, then they haven't developed broad pathways. So they may have a one-lane highway, so they can only process so much information, whereas somebody like Albert Einstein may have a 50-lane highway, and he can process so much more information. Okay? Both people are using 100% of their brain power, but not both people develop the same brain power. One person, you would say, wow, that person's only using 10% of their brain. Einstein's using 100% of his. No, they're both using 100%. One's using 100% of one lane. One's using 100% of 50 lanes. And the difference is both genetic potential, environmental influences. So it makes a difference whether your mom drank alcohol when she was pregnant with you or not. Your brain will have been compromised had your mother drank. And regardless of how hard you work, you didn't start with the same brain you would have started with had mother not drank alcohol when she was pregnant with you. So environmental influences and then your own choices in life, there are limits biologically with how much we can develop. But regardless of what we have, people are using their brains. Okay, they may not be using them wisely. They may be using them dysfunctionally, but they're using them. It's not like you put them in a scanner and say, oh, that part of the brain's turned off. It's not turned off.
So I shouldn't be concerned about having 3 concurrent, simultaneous thoughts occurring at the same time in my brain.
Oh, I often have that. I often have multiple thoughts when people ask me questions. I'm doing question and answer. I may have multiple. I can't even tell you how many. And it's kind of like I'm in my mind, and I'm looking at multiple different screens with all these potential different options. And I have to decide which one am I going to pull to use or integration of them to answer this particular question, because I can't pull them all. There's too many.
But I take incredible comfort because my mind is always looking, while I'm still focusing on what you're saying, and I'm not developing a response. I'm an active listener, so I'm not developing my answer while you're giving your information, but it opens up doors in my mind that say, and you can see behind those doors, all right, as to where I'm going to go. And I don't know whether or not it's a rabbit hole. I don't know if it's the blue pill or the red pill. But I do know that there are simultaneous thoughts going on. And
that's healthy thinking. That's healthy thinking.
And I've never been concerned about that. That I'm able to process. It's almost like you have, in the front of your brain is what you and I are talking about right now. In the back of my brain, I'm processing 7 or 8 other things, and I'm aware of it, but I'm not distracted by it, and feel perfectly sane because of it. Don't find it to be multiple personalities or some kind of multiple voices in my head. It's all me, and it's all the different reasoning of all the influences that have been poured into me. I'm the product of those influences. We've been talking with Dr. Timothy Jennings, as we do on the 3rd Thursday of every month in the 10 o'clock hour. He's first of all, he's a good friend. He is a practicing psychiatrist and a very respected theologian, if only by me. I don't know how but we actually dovetailed off of a presentation that you gave for our last episode from Come and Reason, and answered a question that was very important. We may not have done a show, but I was able to provide that link to that and watched it and thought it was a beautiful explanation as to what happens when we die. So at comeandreason.com there are tremendous resources, a video blog, excerpts from your presentations, also links to your books, and as well as the work you're doing in the psychiatric practice and your continued work on the aging brain, which is always very important as we as a society are actually aging, and some aging better than others, some not aging so well. But I thank you for your friendship. I thank you for your contribution. I thank you for the blessing you are to me, and I appreciate you very much.
Thank you, and bless you, Eric.
God bless you, my friend. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.